Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Bright Family Engagement Parent Learning Series. Today is our March
Hello,
kickoff.
everybody, and
And
welcome
excuse
to
me, I'm just
our
gonna,
Bright Family
I
Engagement
am
Parent Learning
having,
Series.
hello,
Today is our March
sorry, I'm having a little technical. Can people hear my reverb? Okay, hang on. Is that gone? Did I fix it? Okay, apologies, everyone. Just a little tech problem. So again, take two. Welcome everybody to our Bright Family Engagement Parent Learning Series. We are so excited to have an event tonight for you that's talking about the sibling syndrome. We're going to talk about siblings, which we haven't really talked about this year or lately. So we're so excited. And my colleague Lakeisha is going to introduce our fabulous speaker in a second. But I wanted to remind folks that we are the Bright Family Engagement Team, and every month we are bringing you a different topic. And these topics have been identified by parents who have gone through the Bright program, the Bright intervention in the past, and they've chosen the topics that are most of interest to them, that they want to most learn about, and then be in connection with other parents around. So this topic was one of those. So we always kick off the month on the first Tuesday of the month with a learning session just like this. And then we follow with a once a week support group. So the second week of the month is a support group on that topic for parents of elementary age kids. The third week of the month is a support group for parents of high school age kids. And the last Tuesday of the month is a support group. It's an affinity support group for BIPOC identified parents on this same topic. So it's free. It's always free. Anybody is welcome to join these support groups. We really, really welcome you. They're free. We're going to put the flyer in the YouTube live chat, and please show up. These are your support group facilitators, and we're really happy to just meet you and have continued conversations on these topics. So the other thing I'll say is feel free to drop any question for Kylie, our fabulous speaker, in the chat box. And after Kylie talks to us, we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers. So if you want your question to be answered, just drop it in there and we'll grab it. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to my fabulous colleague, Lakeisha. And thank you so much, Lakeisha.
Good evening and welcome, parents and guardians. Again, the topic tonight is the sibling syndrome. And tonight, our guest speaker is Ms. Kylie Letty. She's an author, therapist, and mental health speaker. In 2019, Kylie won the New York Times Modern Love College Essay Contest. Shortly after, she published a book, The Perfect Other, a memoir of my sister, with HarperCollins. As a result of her writing and her advocacy work, she was named the 2023 Forbes 30 Under 30 list. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, The Cut, People Magazine, Parents, Sirius XM, WBUR, among others. Kylie received a Bachelor's of Arts in English and Psychology from Boston College and her MSW in Advanced Clinical Practice from Columbia University. Welcome, Kylie, and the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. I am so excited to be here. I explained to everyone before this started that I'm in Abu Dhabi right now for a women's summit, so I'm a little jet lagged, and I apologize if I begin to ramble. I thought about doing like more of a formal presentation for this, but I really want to speak from the heart. I think like the social worker in me was like, let's get some statistics, let's get some facts, but I think the parents watching this are having their own lived experiences. You know what's going on, and I really want to talk about just kind of my family's background, what happened to my sister, kind of what my experience was on this subject as the sibling that was technically well and not going through what my sister was going through. And I guess about resilience in general and any advice. But if at any point any questions should come up, I would love to have questions in the chat. I can answer them in real time or at the end. But I want this to be more of an open dialogue. So anyway, just jump in whenever and cut me off. I appreciate it. So to begin, I was thinking it'd be helpful just to provide a little background. Lakeisha gave a wonderful introduction, a little bit more about like my family and what brought me here and kind of the journey that ended up with my book, The Perfect Other, a memoir of my sister, and the work I'm doing now. So growing up, it was my mom, my dad, and I, and then I had an older sister, Kate, who was 5 years older than me. And for me, as the younger sibling, I thought she hung the moon. Like I had that little sister adoration of her. I thought she could do no wrong. She was like a second mother to me. And she really was this like caretaker figure. She was all I wanted to be when I grew up. And we had a great relationship. With time, she was always kind of a very like rambunctious kid, a little bit, hard to control in classrooms, a little more like sarcastic, funny, but it was always like this funny thing. It never seemed like anything was actually seriously wrong. She was incredibly bright. She was very social. And then I would say that we were living in Marblehead, Massachusetts, and I was 5 or 6 years old, and she was like 10, 11. And after that, we moved to Philadelphia, my dad's job. And it was around that time when she's in middle school that things kind of start seeming like maybe something more is going on here. She was entering 6th, 7th grade, and she started having more behavioral issues at school. So it started out as her just kind of like getting in fights with other kids in the classroom, getting in trouble for like speaking back to the teacher, that kind of stuff. But again, at that time, it really did seem like it was just kind of like par for the course, just a normal kid stuff. And again, I was so little that to me, I just didn't see what was actually happening there at that time. But in the process of writing my book, I had to look back on things. So I'm looking at like kind of like an investigative journalist type approach to it. So looking at like documents and seeing and what was actually happening, like teachers' reports or my mom like memories and piecing things together. So I kind of had this ability to look at it and kind of find the through line that we couldn't find at the time. Because I'm sure, as all the parents know and all the professionals on this call know right now, it's really just like in the moment you're living it, it's really kind of like it's just chaos. Like you don't know what's going to happen next. You don't know what to expect. You don't see these narratives come through. You don't see what's happening. So in the process of writing the book, that was really my intention, was to go and try to find those through lines. But we ended up leaving the school that we were in because it was in Philadelphia downtown. It was a private school. And Kate was getting in trouble with other girls, having fights. And we ended up moving to the suburbs. So then we went to like Bryn Mawr area of Pennsylvania. And I think that's kind of when I saw, maybe I kind of registered myself as a little kid, like what was actually happening. I just saw my sister getting in more trouble. And when she got to high school, she was kind of like always late to classes and sleeping in. And I think now looking back, I can probably say like there's probably some depression there or something going on. There's a reason why she can't get out of bed. By the time, again, it just seemed like she was like being rebellious or, partying too much, going out too late with her friends, that kind of thing. Not wanting to attend piano lessons. I remember that vividly. She wouldn't come down. I had to come down and do it. But, I see this kind of like shift in her where I feel like as a little sister, you see her withdrawing more from me. It seems like, when I was a kid, she would include me in everything. I went to like every birthday party she had. I would hang out with her friends. Like she would dress me up like a little doll with her friends. Like it was very like idyllic that way. And then I think I saw when she was a teenager that shift happening. But again, no real diagnoses being thrown around. I think like our parents were like kind of investigating like what could be going on. Is something we should be concerned about? That kind of thing. I think when she was around in junior year of high school, she was, I think, kind of first floated around maybe something was like bipolar disorder was happening or something was maybe more serious. And she was having a hard time with her classes. And as a kid who was normally so bright and athletic and social, and things kind of came really naturally easy to Kate. So, and that's kind of the time when we kind of saw that things were getting more serious. But still, she was able to graduate, and she was attending Drexel University in the city, her freshman year of college. And at that point, tell you the math, I think she was 18 and I was like 12, 13. And she was out one night with a group of friends. They were on like a brownstone sitting on a stoop, and some guy hugged her and she fell off the stoop and she hit her head. So that was kind of the moment that I think in my mind, things really shifted from just like something is happening here, maybe a burgeoning, just like beginning stages of a mental health disorder, to like now we're in a serious crisis mode. So that night she had a traumatic brain injury. She was put in a medically induced coma. She had to have like some staples in the back of her head. And the doctor told us basically in the hospital room that when she woke up, she wouldn't be the same. And at that point, we were really thinking like, maybe this is a good thing. Like Kate's really struggling. Maybe maybe that's not bad, that things can get changed. And we had no idea what that meant at the time. Obviously now as a LMSW and all the research I put into it, I know the effects of traumatic brain injuries, but at the time we were really just optimistic that things are going to be okay. And I remember Kate woke up in the hospital finally, and we were all just like heartbroken. We're so scared. And I'm sitting outside the hospital room, like doing my homework, trying to focus still. And it was kind of very like somber, serious moment. And then she woke up, and the first thing she said to me was, "Your hair looks like shit." And I remember being like, okay, like Kate's still here. Got that older sister. But it was kind of like when she came home that night from the hospital, she like immediately like woke up in like a fit of rage, and she wanted to take the car keys and she wanted to drive. And my parents were like, you have to be in bed rest, so you can't drive anywhere. And I remember that was the first time I remember her being like violent with my parents, and like shoving my mom out of the way and taking the car keys and like driving. And we're just so scared that moment that like something's gonna happen to her, that she's gonna get in a car accident or something, or something's gonna happen to somebody else. Like that's kind of the first time we had those thoughts, being like, okay, like she could be dangerous, unfortunately. And I would say after that, going forward, it was a lot of those incidents. It was a lot of her having episodes like that. We had bipolar disorder thrown around at first because she had such high highs and some low lows. And then there was schizophrenia eventually thrown in. And that I think over time became the more primary diagnosis. She had hallucinations starting, she had delusions, paranoia. And for a while, I think she was able to kind of like keep some like semblance of normality together. She was modeling at the time, so she had that kind of to keep her distracted and have like kind of a pathway forward. And then she was still in school part-time for a while. She tried to live with her roommates, but she couldn't get along with them anymore. So eventually she got kicked out, and then she had her own apartment in the city, and then she got kicked out of that, and then she had to go back home. So it was a lot of these little incidences like that where like it's just chaos, like I said, like you can't see in front of you 5 feet. You're just trying to deal with it, the crisis. And then obviously, as the point of this talk is today, as the sibling in that scenario, I think for me, it was like this confusion, heartbreak, and terror of watching my sister who I love so much become somebody different. And then having no way to handle it, no way to understand how to help her. And there were moments where like she would come back to herself. I thought like she would kind of wake up one day and she would seem really normal. She would seem back to her old self, and she would say, like, like, I'm so sorry. I never meant to like scare you. I never meant to do anything. It was so heartbreaking. And she'd ask me to forgive her. And then I would. And then the next day, something bad would happen again, and she'd be somebody else. And then she would be like screaming at us and saying that like my mom was a spy, or, threatening us, or she's going to burn the house down. So it was really scary. And I think for me that time, I'm entering from like 12 to 13, so like kind of middle school years. And then all of my high school experience pretty much was around this. And because we're in this, pretty small town and people know everybody and everyone's business, we try to keep things like really close to home. So I wasn't really telling my friends what was happening. I wasn't telling teachers what was happening. It was really this like kind of this like private secret like fear that was happening behind doors. And I'd have to go like spend a night in a hotel room with my mom because we'd be so scared we had to run away because Kate's like threatening to hurt us, or she's breaking windows, or she's doing something. And then I'd be doing my homework like in these hotel rooms, or I'd be doing my homework in like, like Chipotle. It's we're waiting out till like midnight to go home because we're scared to go home. So it was a lot of chaos around that. And my mom and I talk about it now a lot. And I think looking back, we're kind of like, how did we survive that? Like my father was traveling a bunch, so he wasn't really as around as much, but it was like kind of my mom and I together in it. Um, but yeah, and then that went on for a long time, and she was in and out of psychiatric facilities. She was in group homes. She was in hospitals. We looked into like pain medicine and looking at like tick-borne illnesses and trying to like head injuries, trying to find what is actually going on. And my mom was really, really active and just like looking for solutions and thinking outside the box and doing everything she could. And I always say that like what I say about my book a lot when I say, and I do this kind of presentation, is that we had a lot of resources. Like we weren't really that well to do, but we were very middle class. We had resources, we had a lot of privileges. So we're in the situation where like we can afford to send Kate to a group home or like a new facility, or we can do this, or we can try new medication, a new doctor. And I think looking back at that too, I'm like, I can't imagine personally what that's like when you don't have that option, because it was terrible and heartbreaking and impossible with resources and with that privilege. So we had like police called all the time to our house because she was threatening to hurt us or breaking something. And so it's like all those moments I'm like, it was just literally like every day it was just chaos. And I look back, and actually when I was writing the book and stuff, I was thinking about it, and I had a lot of memory loss from it. I think like the PTSD of it all just they all just blurred together for me. Like I can think of like a moment here or there, but it really blurs together. And then that went on. And then when I was a junior in high school, my sister took her own life. So it was like 3 days for my birthday, my 17th birthday. And I remember being very nervous because I was having a birthday party, which I hadn't had for a while because I was scared to have kids around the house, and I wasn't having sleepovers or anything like that because we weren't really sure how Kate was going to react. And I was like having this like secret birthday party, and I didn't invite Kate or tell her about it, which I felt really guilty about. And then 3 days before my birthday, she passed away. And I think for a while it was like she was missing, we didn't know what was happening. And then eventually we kind of pieced it together, and we saw that she had likely jumped from the Benjamin Franklin Bridge. So after that, it was just kind of many years of grief. My mom and I, again, my dad just like trying to survive, trying to like keep putting one foot in front of the other. Just we were so devastated that like we weren't able to help her. And like I think that despite everything that was going on with her, we really didn't think that was what she was going to do. So again, like a lot of guilt around that, the shame, the grief. And then I went to college, and I've like kind of wanted to with intention of like studying English and psychology. I wanted to use like my love for writing to kind of write about this stuff and try to reduce stigma and shame around it, and just kind of make some conversations. So when I was a senior in college, I wrote this essay about texting my sister from her old number, and like repeatedly throughout college, I would text her and be like, I miss you, or I'd tell her something that was happening, or I'd be like, tell her what was happening with my dad, or what was happening with the Kardashians, like really dumb stuff sometimes. Just trying to keep that like sister dialogue going because I really missed that relationship. And then I wrote an essay about that experience and just like how grief has changed with technology. My teacher recommended I submit it to this contest the New York Times was having in the Modern Love column. And I kind of did it on a whim. I'd never really submitted pieces of writing before, and I was really scared to do that. It was very vulnerable. But I kind of told myself, like, there's no shot it gets published. Like, this will all just go away. But I remember like sitting in my dorm room, and I like kind of sent a prayer to Kate, just being like, if you don't want this out there, if you don't want me writing about you, just like don't make it happen. I believe you have some power up there. You have some control. And then in the week of my sister's birthday, I found out that I had won the contest. So it felt really like this like spiritual moment of being like, she wants me to put this story out there. She wants me to talk about it. But still in the essay, I wasn't talking about mental illness. I was talking about grief. I was talking about sisterhood. I was talking about technology, but I was so afraid to talk about like these harder facts, which is like suicide, depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, like all this stuff that we still felt this like stigma around. And I was scared to like, dishonor Kate's memory in some way. Like by talking about her being violent, am I going to, you know, dishonor her, or am I going to, add more stigma to the conversation too? Is I don't want anyone to think that someone with mental illness is violent, because that was just our experience. It's not the norm. So all these kind of considerations, I ended up just keeping it out of there. And then I got like all these emails from people all over the world being like, thank you for being so vulnerable and being so honest. And I had felt like I was being so not vulnerable. Like I'm hiding like the biggest part of this story out of like this like fear and this self-protection and protection of my family and Kate. So from there, I had like agents reached out to me, asked for a proposal, and I realized right away, like I need to tell the full story. This is my opportunity to get the story out there, and I need to tell what happened to Kate and explain it and tell them all the terrible truths that feel unspeakable in the moment, and just try to bring awareness to what's happening so that people don't feel like they're alone in it, like we did growing up. So then I wrote the book, Perfect Other, that came out. And then since then, I've been just doing advocacy work around that. But yeah, I think that that's a long-winded way of trying to talk about the story. But I think that in looking back and looking at that time period and writing the story, I just kind of have so much credit to my mom, especially, of how she handled everything. And I think that we were able to survive that period because she did a few things that helped me feel like I was kind of like part of the, like, trying to help solve it. I think that can be kind of dangerous sometimes if a kid feels like that pressure on their shoulders, obviously. But for me, it would felt like there was dialogue around it. So like when she went to attend a conference of someone talking about this stuff, she would bring me in. And then I would come sit in the conference room and I would hear people talk about what was happening with schizophrenia and mental illness and all this stuff and people's personal experiences, or like events like tonight. And she let me feel like I wasn't alone in it. I was actually like doing it with her. I knew it was happening. I wasn't just wondering like what's happening to Kate. I was like with my mom trying to figure it out together. And I think that made me feel like a sense of control over it and just like understanding of it versus just being blind to what was happening and having no idea why Kate was being like that. But the other thing I think my mom did really well with this is just kind of like making sure I was being praised for the things I was doing that were positive, and not like I had to like, act out to get attention. I never felt that way. So, like for me, like school was a lifeline. I was never an athlete, unfortunately. So for me, like school was kind of where I could excel and have some self-esteem and kind of see like a future and a path outside of what was happening in the moment, which felt so terrifying and kind of like all consuming. So she would, really praise me when I did well on a test, or when I took a really hard class, or this or that. And we'd go on these like college tours and look at the future and like try to make me excited about it. There was a lot of talk at some point about me going right to boarding school, just get out of the house. And I felt like I was like, also just like as a kid, I did feel a responsibility for it still, and being like, I don't want my mom to get hurt, my dad to get hurt while I'm away. Or I went to sleepaway camp once and I smuggled my phone in, which was bad. So I could text my mom being like, is everything okay? And I think that kind of pressure on a kid obviously is like not ideal, but like none of this is ideal. And I think that parents like put so much pressure on themselves already, and they're caring for the kid who is having these like serious life-threatening issues a lot of times. And then they're putting the pressure on to care for the rest of the kids too. And I think obviously that's important. I'm not trying to advocate against like paying attention to the kid who's doing well, or not sick. But I think that it's also just like kind of like the idea of putting your own life vest on first, and just like trying to giving yourself some grace with it. Like I think if I could look back and talk to my mom, I would say like you're doing great. Like just give yourself some grace. Like you're doing the best you can, and like we need you to be healthy first and foremost, so that the rest of the family can survive. So I think that's the biggest thing. And then like, trying to find a passion or an outlet or something that can just give you like give the kids or kid a sense of like, something to look forward to in the future. So when you're in that moment, like an outlet, or like for me, writing was something always that I felt like I had this passion, I was going to do something with it. And it kind of made me feel like I wasn't just, waiting for the next shoe to drop. I had some like proactivity there. And I think as well, like just like what we didn't do right, maybe, or we could have done at the time, was try to find more community support. Like maybe try to find like a support group or something like this, or something that's for other kids who are going through it. I joined one support group when my sister passed away, and it was a group support group for siblings, and I hated it. So I'm saying that, but I also think there might be some like resistance towards it. I don't be a hypocrite, because I did not want to go. Because for me, it was like I was 17. It was a group of all ages, which is really hard. And it was like 6-year-olds who are grieving, and then me. And they were like, it felt very childish, and I felt condescended. It was just like, I was still having those also normal like teenage angst and like no one understands me moments myself. So I was like, I'm not going to this. But if it's like possible for your family, I think it's great if you can like find community, find a way, an outlet for the other kids to talk about it, so they don't feel like they're alone in it, or they can confide in their friends, confide in their teachers, like let someone know at the school what's going on if possible, so that if your kid doesn't hand in the homework assignment on time, there's a reason for it. Or just try to gather like support around yourself, so that you don't feel like you're alone in it. But yeah, I think this is like, I feel like I've been rambling for a while. But yeah, I think that's kind of everything I really wanted to say around that storytelling, just the idea of just, you're not alone in it. And I think you're doing the best you can, and just to give yourself some grace for that as well. And kids are resilient. I hope I'm proof of that too, that, kids will be okay, hopefully. And to also give some credit to your children, that they can get through this, and that your whole family can.
That was amazing, Kylie. Thank you so much. And Julie and Victor are gonna start with some questions, but just really, really want to thank you for, you're not only an inspiration, but you're such an educator, and you're doing that through your lived experience and your pain and your survival and your resilience. So those are all gifts that you're giving us tonight, and all the parents that are going to watch this from time, here on out. And I know you're doing these kinds of talks other places. So I just hope you realize in your sister's honor and in that love, how much you are touching so many other people.
Oh,
So
thank you.
you
I
so
appreciate
much for
that.
that.
So kind of you. Thank you.
And I'll pass it to Julie and Victor.
All right. Well, Kylie, thank you so much. I'm curious about, you had mentioned your sister had a traumatic brain injury, and I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about that and the connection to what happened after that, because I wasn't aware of that. I'm just curious more about that aspect of it and how traumatic brain injury might impact mental health in people.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. I'm realizing now I had that in my notes, and I didn't touch on it as much as I wanted to. So thank you for bringing it back up. Yeah, so my sister, when like I said, she was a freshman in college when she had the traumatic brain injury. And it was kind of like overnight, she had these behavioral changes. From my research writing the book, I realized like how common that is. And, there was like a New York Times piece. I'm going to maybe botch the numbers a little bit, but it was 111 former NFL players' brains studied in a CT scan. And then they looked at it, and 110 of them had some kind of like traumatic brain injury of sorts. And with that, there was like reported, mental health disorders coming out of it. There's a tendency in a lot of cases to have more violence, or at least to have more difficulty controlling your emotions. Like mood swings are common, depression's common. So it really is, it's scary, because there's not a lot of knowledge around what's actually happening there. I read this really great book too when I was researching my book, and it's called The Angel and the Assassin. And it's kind of about this idea of just this new theory of kind of like encephalitis. So just brain swelling and what could be causing that. And like a lot of things I'm researching too are like Brain on Fire, for example, Susanna Kalin's book. She has that case where she had, oh my God, I'm gonna blush the name again, but it's like this encephalitis that was caused by this like virus she had. and she had like psychosis from it, and she was put into a psych ward, and they had no idea what was going on with her. And then by like sheer miracle, she's one of the first people to be diagnosed with this, and they were able to help her, and she was totally regained like her normal cognitive abilities. So I think this is like it's a huge field that's kind of like, it's being researched right now, but there's still a lot of mystery around it. And when I was doing my research on my book too, I was looking at, again, like records. So I'm looking at like, Kate was hospitalized on this day. 3 days later, like she has her first episode of being violent, or then, a week later, she's being kicked out of school because she's yelling at the dean, going to his office. Like there's like, you see these connections and these through lines. So for me, that's kind of the moment where I'm like, okay, like this kind of got out of control, maybe beyond what we could really solve otherwise. And I still wonder sometimes, like, would it be possible for Kate to have recovered if she didn't have this added factor of the brain injury?
It's amazing, like when I hear that, how quick, that sequence that you shared, like how quickly, those reactions.
Yeah, it was remarkable, like just kind of going back and looking at that, because again, the moment you don't see that, in the moment you're just thinking like, what is happening? And I have to get to school today, and I have to do this report, and I have this test, and I wasn't thinking like what was happening. And I think when you look back on it, you can see like, okay, like that's really the moment things shifted for us.
I want to echo again how important your story is to tell us and to tell everyone. And it's extremely powerful. And also just there's something about the way you present that just it's very even though it was a really hard situation, that you're sort of talking to us in a way that we can really listen, at the same time experience and also have empathy for you. So that's remarkable.
You.
I want to ask you is, so your parents did a great job, particularly your mom did a spectacular job with you. I wanted to know, like, what would you recommend to a family or the child that that had to witness this, had to witness their sibling struggling with mental health challenges? How would you tell them, like, depending on how old they were, like a younger child, a middle school child, a high school child? How would you explain what was going on, and how would you sort of guide the family and help them through it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. I think that's really important too, the age distinction. I wasn't really touching on that. But I think that's really big too. It's just kind of making sure that what your reaction is tailored to the kid. So what they can understand, like you're saying. So if you have like an elementary school age kid who really, it's better just to shelter them from it maybe and not talk about what's going on. I think that's probably best, or to talk about it in language they can understand. Just like, your sibling is sick, like your sibling's going through something. I think for me too, with mental illness, I think sometimes, or mental brain-based disorders, mental health disorders, I think we sometimes like can kind of talk about in a way that feels like it's just like in your head, it's this thing, it's you can't see it, but it's like, no, this person's like actually is sick, they're struggling, something's going on with them, and like to talk about it like that. So it's not like you can like blame the sibling. I think for me with Kate, a lot of it was like understanding that like my sister's not trying to hurt me. She's not trying to be like this. I know her heart. I know who she is, and she's just really struggling. So trying to emphasize that a bit, I think. I also think that if it's appropriate, maybe for like more like a middle school age kid, if there is like a group support or something they can do with kids their own age, or like my mom did with me, attending some conferences or something, or talks or something, so they can understand it. I think that was really helpful. And again, I think just being like praised for what you're doing right. There was a time period when I was little too, like kind of middle school, when I had like a really bad hypochondria fixation where I was like always like really convinced like something was like really wrong with my body. Like I had cancer, or like my lymph nodes were swollen and my armpits. So I was like, I'm dying of cancer. I have this or I have that. And I think like looking back on that too, and I was writing the book, I'm like, that probably was my way of dealing with the situation as well, being like, my sister's sick. We don't know what, we don't know what's going on with her or how to help her. And maybe like almost looking for like a body solution or something, like cancer or something I could like put a name to, or like maybe get attention for myself too or something, or be like, I'm sick too, or I don't know. But I think like that's probably like, I'm sure I'm not alone in that. Maybe I am, but I can imagine something like that coming up. And kind of expecting that, and expecting like the kid to have questions, and your kid to just like want your attention as well, and like your love and support.
I just want to just add on to that too. I really appreciate that and kind of underscoring the piece around like as a parent, what you mentioned, just that word kind of talking about, oh, your sister, your brother's sick, because for a young child, it could be really confusing to see it that way when we're used to, thinking about as a young child, sickness looking different, right? Like looking like, oh, I'm staying home from school, I don't feel well, I'm sick, and helping a child, I think about that. Sometimes sickness looks like a broken leg, and sometimes it looks like a bad stomach, and sometimes it looks like, maybe your sister acting differently than you know her to be, or you know her heart to be. So like, I think that's so helpful. And then I also think about those things that parents can say to a sibling to help them understand, but then also I wonder about those messages that parents can share with the other sibling around, I don't know, like their own feelings that might come up around it, or their safety, or their worry, or anything else that a parent might say to the sibling, or to you, like what you might have heard that felt comforting or something.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think like for me, one of the things I remember just being helped me understand it was like this isn't Kate. And I think that gave me like, and it's hard to say that because obviously like it is her, she's going through this, but like it's something's going on with her brain. There's neurochemistry happening that's turning her into someone that she doesn't want to be, and that she doesn't want to hurt us. She's not trying to be like this. And I think like knowing that that wasn't my sister's intention, I think made me feel like I could understand it better. I think for me too, like a lot of the work I'm trying to do now is around psychoeducation and just understanding like what's actually happening in the brain with this stuff. I think there's like a tendency to, again, kind of not, it's a mystery, and it's easy to be like, when you're a kid, especially, to be like, Kate, like snap out of it and like, get over it. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, you're being weird, like that kind of thing. For me too, I think a regret I have is that like at a certain point I think like probably like in my like early high school years, I feel like I had to like kind of like wall myself off from my sister a bit to just be self-protective. That when she came back to herself and she was saying like, Kaylee, I'm so sorry. Like, you're like my baby. Like, I love you so much. And all that stuff. And then she'd be like, next day, like snap me again. I just kind of had to be like, I'm not going to let her in next time that she's back to herself, because I can't handle the heartbreak when it happens again or she snaps again. Because I mean, there's moments where we're like driving down the road and she's taking the steering wheel and we're gonna like spin into traffic, like in a moment's notice. Like 1 second we're laughing and the next second she's like, something changes in her eyes. And that unpredictability kind of made me have this like approach of being like, I can't get close to you anymore. And obviously when she passed away, I really regretted that. But I also, looking back now, like give myself some grace of just being like, it's kind of an impossible situation in some ways. Like there's a reason why it's so hard, and like you're not alone in these thoughts, and probably the worst thing you've thought, someone else has thought. So just like give yourself that, I think, just grace around that too.
Wow. Yeah. I feel like that was protection for you. You had to be safe somehow. I can't imagine being in those situations and having her flip like that, and your safety could be, at risk. That's so traumatizing. I'm curious, in your work, and maybe even for you, what you've experienced, because you really have done a great job of communicating what's going on. But what do you feel like in families that are dealing with, that has a sibling that is mentally unwell? How does that impact the other siblings? And you can speak from your own experience, but also like just from your background and what you've been learning, in your career.
Yeah, I think that, it's almost impossible for the other siblings not to have some kind of mental health issue themselves. I think it'd be almost like naive to not expect that in some level. I think when I was growing up, like in the moment, I'm thinking like I have anxiety from just not knowing what's going to happen. Maybe I think some kids develop maybe like an OCD around that, an idea of like, how can I control the situation, or trying to find some kind of like, you know, a logical or false sense of control or security. I think that's very common. I think depression is really common. Um, I think there's a lot around that. I think for my family too, a lot of it was like, kind of like I felt this pressure of like, you can't, like I had to be so put together because there's not room for someone else to have an issue in the family. So I think that, I'm already a type A person, I think naturally. Get probably spiral into a lot of perfectionism there that I'm still working on and doing. So I think that's big too. And every kid's different how they're going to react. And I know, I feel a lot for families to when like both kids are really start kind of spiraling at the same time. Um, so it's individual, but also I think the common thread is just that people, are going to be struggling at some point. So I think like maybe having protective factors in there, just that, the well sibling has a therapist too, or they have something to talk to outside the family, so they can like let go and be like, I'm having anxiety, I'm having depression, I'm having these feelings, and I can put that on somebody who's a professional and not just my parents who are already stressed out. So anyway, just like having those like protective cushion factors.
Yeah, that really resonates, that idea of like, don't worry, I don't have any problems. There's nothing, I'm okay with everything. You can preserve your energy over here because I'm okay. You don't have to worry about me, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think again, like there's another moment I'm writing the book too and thinking about this stuff. And I got my degree at Columbia for my MSW. And I think it broadened my horizons just thinking about this from like, again, not just the individual perspective, but a more, global, universal perspective. And I think like I remember being young and us being like, I didn't see a therapist till Kate passed. And I only saw her like 3 times. And it was Kate's old therapist. So it was like, very, I don't think that's a really good idea now that I'm a therapist. Like you shouldn't be doing that. But I think like at the time too, it was like, it's a financial burden as well. There's that aspect of it of being like, can we afford to put both kids in therapy? Can mom get therapy? Is there time for mom to get therapy or dad to get therapy? Like there's such a pressure there. And I think, again, as a family who had a lot of privileges in that sense, we're thinking about that. Like, can Kylie afford to go to college if Kate's in a group home? Like it's like the money has to go somewhere and the resources have to go somewhere. I think parents have to make these really difficult decisions. So if there's community supports that you can go to, if it's like guidance counselor at the high school or just somebody to talk to, it doesn't have to necessarily be like a mental health professional, but just somebody who is like can lend an ear to the situation and offer advice and counsel.
So you talked about not feeling safe sometimes and what that was like for you. And I wondered what you would do now, talking to other families about how would you keep everybody safe in the house? How would the parent do that? Would there be limits? Would there be certain things that were definite no's? Would you hide things in the house? Like what, or you wouldn't allow certain situations to actually happen so they wouldn't set up to be a dangerous situation? I was just wondering what your take would be now and what your experience has been, and also as a therapist, what your take would be.
Yeah, that's really important. Thank you. I think it's hard, I remember like for us growing up, it was like at a certain point, like the knives are not accessible, the knives are hidden away, or there's things like that um you don't have. I think, it's so hard because like Kate was violent and I don't want to not talk about that because I'm sure there are families out there who are dealing with that. But then in my clinical profession and my experiences there, I've been in group homes with women who have schizophrenia and, and similar disorders as Kate, and they're not violent at all. And there are safety precautions there too, or we had like lock boxes for like knives. They had to be asked to use them when they're cooking dinner, or like, prescription pills are kind of locked away. I had to administer drugs. But in general, I think it's important to me also to like kind of emphasize that fact as well, as like we were living in a dangerous situation. I think that I'm sure that's common, but it's not like everyone who has mental health disorder or who has schizophrenia or bipolar disorder is going to be violent too. And I'm always like really afraid to add stigma in that sense too. So I think in terms of just keeping safe, I think that we didn't have a lot of family around us where we were living. We were kind of like, it was for my dad's job. We'd moved there. I always thought we were moving away. Then we stayed for a while. So I think like if you have like a family or something like that, or someone in the area you trust that you can be like, hey, like, you know, this person's acting up, this kid's acting up, or they're having an episode, like, can I put like, little Bobby or somebody, whoever's name is, like over your house tonight or sleepover, or just like kind of put that, like, again, like leaning on supports. The other thing I think I would have told my mom probably back then, looking back now, is like, again, just like leaning on your community as much as possible. There's such stigma and there's such fear and shame around being like, my kid is scaring me or my kid is like threatening me. But like, if you don't have a place that you can go to or your kid can go to feel safe, I think like you're going to feel so alone in it. And that's the one thing I wish we had done differently, is just to open up more and not feel like we were the only people in the world experiencing this.
Well, I'm wondering a little bit about, like, obviously you said you were pretty high functioning at school, and I'm curious, how much, you said you guys kept it pretty quiet as a family, and I imagine that took a toll, first of all, and how hard, I guess I have two parts. How hard was that to keep that kind of locked down? And then second, any thoughts on how like educators can support children that are experiencing this situation where they have a sibling that is really struggling? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, another great question. Thank you. Yeah, I have a lot of educators in my family. My aunt's a teacher, my grandma was a teacher. She still subs into her 80s. But so I have a lot of just respect for teachers in general. And I think teachers tend to do usually a really great job of just, kind of checking in or noticing changes like that, or noticing a kid who's falling asleep in class and being like, maybe something more is going on there, and checking in. For us, we didn't really confide in anybody until after Kate had passed. And I think that there was a weird thing that happened too, where I was like, I can finally talk about this. Like, this is in the open. Almost like, it's like, here's something that's going on with my life that like, it's not, it's not taboo to talk about. Like, I can say it. So it's like, I would tell my friends like this happened. And then it was almost like this like disappointment coming around, being like, oh my gosh, like people don't know how to handle this. Like, I was like, I thought people would be able to be there for me once I had told them what was happening. And then you realize like, especially other kids are like, kids are just kids. And like, they have no idea what's going on. They don't know how to support you. Like, even now personally, when I have a friend who's like grieving or going through something really hard, you like, even as somebody who like is a therapist and like has this background, this education behind me, like I still find it hard to be like, how often do you reach out? What do you say to somebody? Like all those like those considerations. So I think that's difficult. And I also think like in the moment when like, things are just chaos, it's hard to not want to feel like you're betraying the sibling, that's the person in your family, by talking about it. Um, but I was lucky that my school, once Kate had passed, was really great about just like checking in with me and like giving me some grace. And remember the first test I took was a physics test. And I didn't take time off school, which is also not okay. Don't do that. But I was back the next day, not a good idea. And I remember I took a physics test and I just like looked at it and I wrote my name and nothing else. Like I was like, to me, that was like so hard to not be able to like, kind of like think properly. And I felt like my own brain was like going through something of like, oh, I can't focus. I can't think. Like I'm so grieving. And like my whole life I could like power through this and I could say like, go to school the next day and get it done. And then once Kate was gone, I had that grief. I was like, I can't power through this. So I think like that teacher kind of pulled me aside. I handed it in to him. I just started bawling my eyes out. And then he would like, every time I'd had lunch or something, he'd offer to be like, do you want to eat in my classroom? Do you want to be alone? Do you want to talk to me? And he would like call my mom all the time and he would check in with her. And I think those are people like in your community who like are just kind people who are empathetic and willing to go above and beyond. And if you give people a chance to be there for you, I think you will hopefully be surprised that people can handle it and will be there.
That's so beautiful.
My next question is about attention. So when you have a child with mental health challenges and the other child is not exhibiting that, obviously there's going to be more attention on the child that has the mental health challenges. And I was wondering, like, what would you give advice to people or help or support on what to do on how to explain to that child that, this child needs, something more or something different than what you're getting, but you're getting the same, and explaining how that would look or what that might be.
Yeah, definitely. I think I got so lucky there because my mom was so good at that. She was so naturally just good at just making sure I felt like I was getting attention. But I think one thing she did that was really great was just praising me for like things I was doing well. So I wasn't like, I was like, I have to go out and party and get in trouble or do something to get attention or act out, I was like, I can like do really well in school, and then she can tell me how proud she is of me and like give me that attention. So I didn't feel that way. I think that there was an area which like she was telling me like, kind of like, again, like being very honest with me, being like, we can't handle you to act out. So like, please don't. And I think I did a good job of taking that and being like, okay, that's some honesty, that's some vulnerability there. And I was able to be like, I'm not going to do this. So I was like, I didn't drink in high school at all. I went to like parties all the time, and I would be the one kid just like not drinking or like holding a beer, not sipping it. Like I was so afraid to do anything bad. I wasn't even taking a sip. Like I was like, I can't, like, I can't possibly get in trouble. Um, and I think like that pressure, I think, like again, it's hard. Like I think it's really hard, but also like it's like I think the kid will be okay too. So I want to be able to tell the parents like your kid is resilient, like they can handle this. There's hope, but don't put that pressure on you. Try to pay attention to them, try to encourage them, try to be open and honest when you can, and protective when you have to be. But I don't know. I felt really lucky that that's not something I struggled with. That I didn't feel like I needed to do that.
Great.
So I'm wondering, you had mentioned, and I don't know if you even have any thoughts on this because maybe you didn't experience this personally, but I'm wondering about other parents giving advice that may not sit well. Kind of the old theme. Sometimes parents would say, or people would say, like just kick that kid out or something like that. I don't know if your family experienced that, or if you felt like, or if you have any ideas on how someone might respond to that, because I do hear that a little bit from some of the families I work with.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that for us, it was a lot of like some people telling us like tough love approach of being like, she's doing this, like she's out of the house, like she's homeless, or she's. I think there were times where my parents tried that approach a little bit to be like, we're not accepting this behavior, or like snap out of it. The truth is, mental illness, like they can't snap out of it. I think it's like, it's just kind of like that's not a realistic approach because it's not possible. Um, I think for us, it was like hard to understand that and hard to understand like how much wasn't in Kate's control. And it wasn't a behavioral thing. I think something my father kind of struggled with a little more than my mom did too, is just the idea of like, how can we fix this problem? How can we like solve this? How can we, get her to wake up and change? And then eventually realizing over time, like it's hard. You can't. All you can do is kind of support and like look for treatments, look for programs, like do your research, like try your best and try to be there for somebody. But like it's yeah, I don't know. I'm not an advocate of the tough love approach. So I definitely think that's advice that we got, like you're saying, that was hard for my parents and me to hear and just be like, that's not possible. You can't turn love off either. You can't just be like, like it's not how parents operate with their children.
Yes. I think that's great. Even we can operationalize that like beyond this too. Like I think we've probably all heard parents give like us, maybe even personally, like the unsolicited advice. And I think like, like, thank you. Like, that doesn't, that's not going to work for me and my family, or, whatever it is. It's like, no, thank you. But, yeah. I also really, I just want, this is more of a comment, but I just want to say, like, I really appreciate a lot of your thinking that you're sharing, because I feel like I wonder if for some parents going through this, maybe with two or more kids, if it might feel like almost a Sophie's choice, like, do I take care of this child or this child? And I feel like you're really sharing that it's not like, that like there are ways to actually care for your child who's really struggling and not well, and that doesn't have to be at the expense of another child. Like all these different things you're sharing are ways to like care for, give room to your other kid to have their full experience, and it's like not one or the other.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's like this, I think parents, I'm not a parent myself yet, but I think parents have a lot of just like pressure on them, obviously. And it's like everything you do is impacting this kid, and like everything has to be perfect. They have to be bubble wrapped, or you have to make sure they see nothing bad happens to them. And I hope that like I can kind of comfort parents a little bit too, to be like, kids are resilient too. And like, I think obviously I wish I hadn't been through what I had been through with my sister. I wish we could have saved ourselves, and especially her, that heartbreak. But I also think like I came out of it like a more empathetic person. I think I, went into it now thinking like people are dealing with things. I approached my whole life that way. Like everyone has something that's going on they're not talking about maybe, or there's always something that you don't know what someone's struggling with. And I think in some ways it made me like more mature and like, I don't know, like, I guess like not to be all like turn into a positive, it's not a positive, but I think there's hope there and just like you're doing your best and to give yourself that break.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you actually for one of the last questions I was going to mention. Like, what are the benefits? What is really like, and you answered it, but even more things. What has happened to you that surprised you that you feel like you've done better because you grew up in this situation? And where have you grown? And what things have been also challenging? And you can sort of see the holes, and you're like, wow, that's really hard for me because I had this family dynamic.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's some things I'm still like unlearning. I think that like I definitely have a little like PTSD from some of that experiences, and it took me a while to realize that and to stop like that whole train of like keep going and keep plugging away and then finally like kind of wake up and like really deal with it. Like I remember being a kid and I had to kind of barricade my bedroom door in case something should happen with Kate and like kind of like put like a chair against the wall. And then this is like probably oversharing here, but even like last weekend, I was home alone. I lived with my boyfriend and he was out of town and I barricaded my door. And I was like, oh my gosh, like Kylie, like you need to stop. But it's like, I was like, wow, I'm surprised because that reaction is like still inside me. So I think you're still dealing with like the repercussions of this stuff, but like you're saying, there are positives. There's the act of just being more empathetic, the act of just having like more that understanding of like the full spectrum of human emotions and what someone can go through. I think now I'm a better friend for it a lot of times. I think that when I have a friend who's grieving or something's going on, I can be there with them and I can sit with them in it. I'm not afraid of that kind of stuff. And I also think it's like, for me personally too, has been a whole thing with like, I have my own children, like if I have my own kids and they're going through this and like, it's like, I think I have a little bit more perspective on just like, whatever you get, you can like deal with it. And I feel like my mom has given me a lot of strength to be able to like approach life and like take what's handed and just kind of keep going and keep understanding that life's not easy and these things are not to this extent, but there's things that are to be expected to go wrong and just kind of to how to deal with that appropriately.
Well, there are a lot of parents out here right now watching this YouTube live link, or will watch in the future because we share the link out. What message of hope do you want to share with those parents watching this?
It's a good question too. I think that I guess in our family story obviously had a very tragic ending, but I think that I still feel like my relationship with my sister is ongoing in a lot of ways. It made me feel like a much more spiritual person. I think growing up, I really wasn't interested in religion or spirituality or anything like that. And I think since losing Kate, I felt like you almost need something when you go through grief. And for me, I felt like I do feel connected to my sister still, and I feel that relationship continues in some way. And I feel like if something really good happens to me, or we had this thing of wishing on 11/11 on our clocks. So when I see 11/11, I think of my sister or those kind of things. And I don't know, I think just that, love continues and persists no matter what. And yeah.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Kaylee. Oh my gosh, I almost came to tears a couple times
Me too.
because
Me too.
you were so vulnerable. I thank you so much for sharing your experience and especially sharing your sister's story, because I know that there's a lot of us that's gone through this or who are actually dealing with this as we speak. And you've provided a lot of information and a lot of hope for a lot of our families and siblings as well. And a lot of the, some takeaways, a lot of takeaways, but couple ones that stuck with me is, especially for parents and guardians, give yourself some grace. you know I love that piece because you're right, parenting is not easy, and especially when you do have children with either, significant mental health issues or, medical issues going on, and, with multiple children, it's a lot. And the fact that children are resilient, you don't think about that children are resilient. we just focus on making sure that they're okay. But yes, children are resilient. So that's a great takeaway. And I hope parents also got a lot of takeaways from tonight's event and from your from this topic as well. And I just want to, remind parents of our free weekly parent groups that take place every Tuesday. And we will continue to discuss this topic with the next 4 Tuesdays. So next Tuesday will be for parents of elementary school age children. And the following Tuesday, which will be March the 20th, will be groups for parents of middle and high school age students. And the last Tuesday of the month will be for our BIPOC affinity families. Thank you so much again, Kylie. This was great. And have a great night, everybody.
Thank you so much, Kylie.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. This is a great program. I'm so happy it exists.